Guys, we're going to start part 14 of our Bible study through Philippians. We're going to cover two verses today, Philippians 1, 27 and 28. And so it starts, only let your manner of life be worthy of the gospel. And so Paul's given this directive to the church at Philippi. He's saying, live in a way that's worthy of the gospel. Now, does that mean that we have to earn the gospel or earn salvation? Absolutely not. But we're going to look a little bit. I'm going to ask the question, what does that mean? He continues on, so that whether I come and see you or am absent. And so Paul's kind of giving this truth that I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it back to you or not. In fact, I don't know if I'm going to live or die. In the last study we looked at, Paul was okay if he went on to be with the Lord. But he knew that while he was here on earth that he had ministry to do. And he's saying, so whether or not I come to you or I don't come to you should not matter how you live. And I would say the same thing is true. If you knew that Jesus was coming back tomorrow, would you do things different today? Seen the joke several times, Jesus is coming, look busy. And sometimes we do that with our bosses. When we know our boss is coming, we're going to look busier. If we know that somebody's watching, we act different. But integrity is acting the same way whether somebody's watching or not watching. And the truth is, God is always watching. And so we should act the same way no matter who's present. And so Paul's telling them, whether I die or I live, whether I come to see you or don't come to see you, live in a way that's worthy of the gospel. And he says, that I may hear of you that you are standing firm in one spirit with one mind. And so he's talking about unity in the church. And I just want to remind you guys that unity in the church does not mean uniformity. There's going to be a lot of different looks of how the church ministers and a lot of different ways that churches reach the lost or to disciple believers. And so just because a denomination or a local body looks different than yours does not mean that we don't have unity. Unity is not about the outward appearance, but as this says, about having one spirit with one mind. And it goes on to say, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel. So even though our ministries may look different and our local congregations may look different, the mission is still the same, striving side by side for the faith of the gospel. And he said, not frightened in anything by your opponents. Now this is kind of referring back to what Paul's been dealing with. He says, I've been dealing with all this different persecution and all these different things going on, but don't be scared of it. Don't be scared of it. You should not be scared of those who are your opponents or those who oppose you, those who don't like the way you do things. And it says of those opponents, this is a clear sign to them of their destruction. If somebody opposes the gospel and they do not turn away from that opposition, but instead embrace the opposition of the gospel, we know that that leads to destruction. We're told that blasphemy of the Spirit is unforgivable sin. And to reject the gospel is blasphemy of the Holy Spirit. And he says this is a clear sign to them of their destruction. So their persecution of the gospel is a clear sign of destruction. But for you it says, but of your salvation, and that from God. And so if you're being persecuted because of your belief in the gospel, then it's a clear sign of the gospel living in you and of your salvation. So 3 quick questions that I want you to study. The first one is what does it mean to be worthy of the gospel of Christ? And so some different places you can look, study. Ephesians 3, Romans 6. The list on this one is endless. Look at what it means to be worthy of the gospel of Christ versus trying to earn the love of Christ or earn salvation. We can never earn, and honestly, we can never live worthy, but we can try to. The next question is this, how can striving side by side help spread the gospel? And I take it a step further, is what does striving side by side with other believers look like to you? John 17:20, Jesus' prayer before the execution, before the cross, is a good place to study. Ephesians chapter 2, Ephesians 4, especially verse 3. And here's the last question. Who are opponents of the gospel, and how are we to handle them? Paul's making mention of that do not be frightened of the opponents, of those who oppose you. This is the sign of their destruction. And so, who are the true opponents of the gospel? And dealing with those opponents, how do we handle them? A good place to start is Matthew 5, where Jesus talks on the Sermon on the Mount about how to love your enemies. 1 Thessalonians 2:2, 2 Timothy 2, there's some great instruction to a young pastor named Timothy about how to handle the opponents of the gospel. And so hope you guys are studying and not just watching the videos, but studying the Word, seeing for yourselves what the gospel is all about.